My boyfriend and I can't stop fighting. I'm a 25-year-old woman, and my boyfriend is 32. Lately, our relationship has been turbulent, marked by arguments that seem to spiral out of control. It's painful to write this, but I feel like I need to lay it all out. I apologize in advance for how long this will be, but it's a reflection of how much is weighing on my heart. Our troubles aren't new. They've existed in some form for a while now, mostly tied to his drinking. In the early days of our relationship, it was easier to overlook. Back then, it was like this quiet undercurrent present, but not something I felt compelled to address head-on. He could be sweet, charming, and attentive, the kind of man who would hold the door open and remember the little things that mattered. But when he drank, a different side of him emerged, one that was harder to reconcile with the person I loved. He has a complicated relationship with alcohol, one that seems to dance between extremes. There are periods when he abstains entirely, vowing to quit cold turkey, and I let myself hope that maybe this time, the cycle will finally break. For weeks, he'll manage to stay away, and I see glimpses of the man I know he can be. But then the drinking starts again, innocently enough at first. A beer here, a glass of wine there. Slowly, imperceptibly, the frequency increases until it becomes an avalanche. Before long, he's drinking heavily, and the arguments inevitably follow. The alcohol transforms him. He becomes combative, his words sharper, his tone more accusatory. In these moments, it feels like I'm speaking to a stranger, someone intent on finding faults and igniting conflict. Yet, despite all this, we've always managed to work things out. We've had long, tearful conversations, apologizing and promising to be better for each other. And for 2 years, that pattern of hurt and healing became our rhythm. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. This holiday season has been different. I decided to visit my family for Christmas, something I had been looking forward to for months. He stayed behind, living and working in our apartment. We planned for him to join me closer to Christmas, but the separation already felt like a rift. The physical distance magnified the emotional one, and with me gone, his drinking seemed to escalate. At first, the phone calls were sweet. He missed me, he said. He couldn't wait to see me. But as the days went by, the tone of those calls shifted. I began to notice subtle changes in his voice, the slur, the bravado, the way his words carried a hint of hostility. It was like he was challenging me, daring me to react. I suspected he had been drinking, but I hesitated to bring it up. I've learned that addressing his drinking directly often leads to defensiveness, so I tread carefully. Since I've been away, his drinking has only worsened. It's not something he admits outright, but I can tell. The way he slurs his words when he calls me late at night, the fragmented train of thought, the inexplicable irritability, it all points to one thing. The alcohol is back in control, and with it, his combative streak. Last night was another call, another fight waiting to happen. I almost didn't pick up. My stomach sank as I saw his name flash on the screen. But I answered anyway, hoping maybe foolishly that this time would be different. He greeted me with a casual tone, but there was an edge to it, something slightly off. I knew he'd been drinking. It wasn't just the way he spoke, but the way he positioned himself in the conversation, as though he was daring me to say the wrong thing. At first, the conversation started innocently enough, a surface-level exchange about our days. But then, almost out of nowhere, he made a jab about my cooking. "You know," he said with a half-laugh, "you really can't cook. I don't know how you manage to eat without burning water." I forced a smile he couldn't see, my heart sinking. It wasn't the first time he'd joked about my cooking, but it stung more than usual. I didn't want to engage. I didn't want to fuel the fire. So, I brushed it off and said softly, "Hey, that's a little bit discouraging. I think I do okay." My voice trembled slightly, betraying the effort it took to keep my tone even. But he didn't stop there. "You're going to hate your life as a nurse, you know," he added, his words sharper now. I mean, you think it's all helping people, but it's not. It's just dealing with crap literally and figuratively. That hit harder. Nursing school has been a challenge, but it's something I'm passionate about, something I've poured my heart into. I took a deep breath, trying not to let his words affect me. I think I'll enjoy being a nurse, I said simply, holding on to my resolve. He didn't let up. Yet, sure, he replied, his tone dripping with sarcasm. You'll just be doing care aide work. And let's be honest, care aides are garbage. The words hung in the air like a slap. I felt my chest tighten, my breath hitching in disbelief. He knew I was training to be an LP and he knew how much it meant to me. Do you think LPNs are garbage? I asked, my voice quiet but steady. There was a pause, and for a moment, I thought he might backtrack. Maybe he'd realize how cruel his words had been. But instead, he said, well, you didn't prove me wrong. I sat there, stunned, the phone pressed against my ear. My mind raced, torn between hurt and anger. I wanted to defend myself, to tell him how wrong he was, but I knew it would only escalate things. And yet, his words lingered, cutting deep. They weren't just dismissive, they were dismissive of me, my dreams, my worth. I swallowed hard, forcing back the tears that threatened to spill. Okay, I said quietly, not knowing what else to say. I didn't want to fight, but I also didn't want to let him get away with saying something so hurtful. So, I let the conversation drift into silence, hoping he'd realize the damage he'd done. But he didn't. I left it at that, fighting my tongue as hard as I could. I didn't want to argue, not again. My mind raced with all the things I could say, all the retorts bubbling just beneath the surface, but I swallowed them down. I told myself it wasn't worth it, not tonight, not when I could tell he was looking for a fight. He shifted the conversation, suddenly upbeat in a way that felt forced. He started talking about how great it would be for me to work overtime once I was a nurse. He said it like he was already imagining it, painting this picture of me pulling long hours, bringing in steady money while he, well, what exactly? I wasn't sure. I've always loved working as many hours as possible, he added casually, as though this was an established truth about him. I froze. That wasn't true, not even close. He'd lost his last job, in large part, because of a pattern of leaving early, a habit we'd argued about before. It wasn't just the job he lost, it was the way he carried himself, the excuses, the justifications. I'd supported him through all of it, hoping he'd grow from the experience, but now, hearing him rewrite the narrative so confidently, it felt like a slap in the face. I didn't want to contradict him outright, but I couldn't let it go completely. So, I treaded carefully, my tone soft. To be fair, I said, you did have a habit of leaving blank early. There was a sharp inhale on the other end of the line, and I knew I'd struck a nerve. Have a good night, he snapped, cutting the conversation short with a finality that felt like a door slamming shut in my face. I stared at my phone, stunned. The call was over, and yet his words hung in the air, heavy and unresolved. My chest ached with the weight of it. I hated leaving things this way unfinished, bitter. I tried to reason with myself, telling myself that it wasn't my fault, that I'd only spoken the truth. But that didn't make the knot in my stomach go away. I called him back. I don't know why, maybe because I felt guilty, maybe because I thought if I just explained myself, he'd understand. He picked up on the second ring, but his tone was cold, distant. I'm sorry, I said, the words tumbling out before I could lose my nerve. I didn't mean to upset you. I wasn't trying to hurt you. But he wasn't having it. His voice was sharp, cutting through my apology like a blade. Oh, so now I'm the bad guy, he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. I'm such a piece of shit, huh? That's what you think of me? No, that's not what I meant, I said quickly, desperate to defuse the situation. I didn't say that. I was just trying to. Don't bother, he interrupted, his words like ice. Why don't you just stay at your parents' house? Don't come back. Seriously, why even bother? His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt my throat tighten, my chest constricting as I tried to process what he'd just said. Why would you say that? I asked, my voice trembling. You know I don't hate you. I'm trying to work this out, to fix things. Fix what? He shot back. You've already decided I'm worthless. What's the point? I was silent for a moment, struggling to find the right words. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that I didn't think he was worthless, but the way he twisted my words made it feel impossible to reason with him. Still, I tried. I didn't mean to make you feel bad, I said softly. I know I shouldn't have brought it up, but... Oh, so now it's my fault for feeling bad? Great, thanks, he interrupted. His voice was filled with bitterness, a sharp edge that cut me to the core. I felt the tears welling up, but I blinked them back, determined to stay calm. I'm not blaming you, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I just want to understand what's going on. He didn't answer right away, and for a moment, I thought maybe I'd broken through to him. But then he sighed heavily, the sound filled with frustration. Whatever. I'm done talking about this. I wanted to push back, to say that we needed to talk about it, but I knew it wouldn't do any good. He wasn't ready to listen, and I couldn't force him to. Okay, I said finally, my voice breaking. I'll let you go. I hung up, staring at the screen as the call disconnected. My hands were trembling, my heart pounding in my chest. I felt defeated, drained. This wasn't the first fight we'd had, but it felt different, more personal, more hurtful. And the worst part was, I didn't know how to fix it. We never resolved it. I could feel the conversation slipping further and further into a place where no good could come from it. Exhausted and on the verge of tears, I finally told him I had to leave. It wasn't an ending, it wasn't even a truce. It was just the only way I could protect myself from the spiral we seemed to be stuck in. I hung up, but the weight of the conversation stayed with me, pressing down on my chest like a stone. The next morning, I woke to a message from him. At first, I hesitated to read it. Part of me hoped it would be an apology, a recognition of the hurt he'd caused, but another part of me braced for more blame, more deflection. When I finally opened it, it was somewhere in between. He apologized, but it wasn't the kind of apology that felt meaningful. I'm sorry for leaving early, he wrote, acknowledging the comment I had made. But then he added, I just got upset because you said I was a bad worker and that my manager hates me. I stared at the screen, dumbfounded. I never said anything like that. I replayed the conversation in my head, trying to figure out how he could have twisted my words into something so cruel. I had mentioned the habit of leaving early gently, cautiously, and with no intention of belittling him. But somehow, he had taken that one comment and turned it into a full-blown attack on his character. I didn't respond right away. I couldn't. Instead, I sat with the growing knot of unease in my stomach, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. This wasn't like us, not the us I thought I knew, at least. In the 2 years we'd been together, we'd had our share of disagreements, sure. But we had always been able to work things out, to talk to each other like adults. There had been an unspoken understanding that, no matter what, we were on the same team. But now it felt different. The fights over the past month had a new edge to them, a bitterness that hadn't been there before. And the drinking, it was always the drinking. It wasn't an excuse, but I couldn't ignore the way it seemed to bring out the worst in him. The combative streak, the defensiveness, the way he twisted my words until I couldn't recognize them anymore, it all seemed to stem from the alcohol. But even so, I had never seen him like this before. Not even during his worst moments. I felt lost. I didn't know what to do. The man I loved, the man I'd built a life with, was slipping further and further away from me, and I didn't know how to reach him. I thought about the times we'd laughed together, the times we'd stayed up late talking about our future, the quiet moments of tenderness that had made me fall in love with him in the first place. Were those moments still enough? Could they outweigh the pain, the anger, the growing cracks in our relationship? I thought about calling him, about trying to explain myself one more time, but I hesitated. What good would it do? Every time I tried to fix things, it only seemed to make them worse. And yet, doing nothing felt just as unbearable. The thought of losing him, of walking away from everything we'd built together, made my chest ache. What do I do? The question echoed in my mind, unanswered. I wanted to believe that we could get through this, that we could find our way back to the love and respect we once had. But for the first time, I wasn't sure if that was possible. The weight of his drinking, the growing resentment, the way he lashed out and refused to take responsibility, it all felt too heavy, too much for me to carry alone. I don't have an answer. I wish I did. All I know is that I can't keep doing this, not like this. Something has to change, but I don't know if he's ready for that. I don't even know if I'm ready for that. All I know is that I love him, and I hate what this is doing to us. What do I do?